Welcome everyone to NCEA's Creating a Culture for Shared Leadership webinar. My name is Kate Reich and I am the organizer for today's event. Please know that all of your microphone connections with today's webinar have been muted. During the presentation, you may ask questions or provide comments for the presenter by using the chat and/or question functions located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. To use these functions, click on the chat or question bubble and then click into the blank box area and enter your question using your keyboard. Then click send. We are also hosting a conversation online at todaysmeet.com. I just sent the URL out to you if you would like to participate in the online conversation. And that is at todaysmeet.com/NCEA Culture Conversation, which is all one word. We will be hosting one poll today, and we certainly encourage you to participate when that poll is published. The webinar presentation will run for 45 to 50 minutes, leaving some time at the end for the presenter to answer any questions that you have provided. You will be asked to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar later today, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and you will all receive a copy of the final recorded presentation, which we will email to you once the recorded file is available. This webinar is provided to you all with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and as a follow-up to the NCEA Common Core Math workshops that took place this past summer. I'm happy to welcome back Sue Nelson, Associate Superintendent for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, as today's webinar presenter. Please welcome Sue.
Hi, thank you, Katie. I am very, very happy to be here. As Kate mentioned, I am participating in this webinar in a big way because of my participation in the summer math experience that we had in Louisville, and I would like to welcome hopefully members of the leadership cohort, the people who participated in that who are in some type of leadership role in their schools or dioceses, and I really want to thank them for their input because they were really important in helping me determine what the content of this webinar might be. I think some of my collaborators from work in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee may be joining me, so I thank them for some of their slides were blatantly stolen, but they told me that was okay, so I'm very grateful to them. And really any school leaders who are looking at what's going on today in education, and of course specific to the changes of the Common Core standards, however those are being received in your diocese, the reality is there are changes that are being required of us as educators in many ways, and we need to address that. So our goal here is to figure out how do we make that happen, hence the title, Creating a Culture for Shared Leadership, because quite frankly, we cannot do it alone. As a little bit of background in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, we've been embarking on a process of an initiative really to try to get our professional learning as job embedded as possible and to really, really help our administrators become a professional learning community with us to move that initiative forward. Our Archdiocese is 115 schools, 10 counties, so it's really critical that we learn to address that. So I'd like to just share with you to start then what our desired outcomes are for our conversation today. First of all, we would like to reflect on the cultural characteristics of high and low performing schools. So when we look at the research, what really stands out to us or what really informs us when we look at a high versus a low performing school? I think it's important that we identify what shared leadership is and what it isn't. That's an interesting conversation to have. And then finally, what are some of the barriers to shared leadership? How can we address them? Because really we're at a point right now in our schools where before we can do anything, we really need to analyze our current culture. Without that type of reflection, we can't go very far. As Kate mentioned, I do invite you to participate in today's meet. I just love using that back channel, and hopefully some of you will join in that as well. And she provided all that information for you. I have set that to be open for a week. So if there are questions that come up on today's meet that I'm not able to address in the conversation, I certainly will get back to you. I wanted to start with the national standards and benchmarks for Catholic schools because those really are the guiding force behind all of the work that we're doing in all of the dioceses in Wisconsin. And what struck me about this particular comment is we talk about ourselves as educational communities and communities of faith. And one of the caveats or the dangers in this focus on the educational community, it sounds weird to say a danger, but the research, I'm speaking specifically of Victoria Barnhart, she has a very nice document called The Essential Questions for Improvement in Faith-Based Schools, and they've done a lot of research, and they have found that in some cases, and in many cases in an urban environment, this would be true. What they find is that as the focus starts shifting to the educational community focus, for example, we have to make gains, academic gains for students. That's what we're being judged on. That's the public perception of our school. And with that happening, sometimes the faith component of our schools is what gets lost. So that's a pretty disturbing thing when you think about it, that our faith identity can be the first thing to go if we focus very, very intentionally on the academics. So obviously, number one, job one, as the characteristics defined here, is we cannot let that happen. I just wanted to start with the conversation about the culture in your school, and I thank Tom Kiley, who works with us in the Archdiocese, for this graphic. But when you're talking about the culture of your school, one of the things we really need to think about is what is the message being sent, and who are the people that are sending that message. So if you just think back to this biblical reference, I'm just going to share a couple sentences of this reading for you to contextualize this. So I'm starting right at the beginning. At this sound, they gathered in a large crowd, but they were confused because each one heard them speaking in his own language. They were astonished, and in amazement they asked, "Are not all these people who are speaking Galileans? Then how does it that each of us hear them in our native tongues?" And that really, really struck us when we were preparing to work with our administrators in the Archdiocese, because it really does call the question. If you think about this passage relating to school culture, you need to think about your students, your parents, your parishioners, your community members. What message are they receiving? So a very critical question, I believe, in this conversation is, do the members of your staff speak the same message with different voices? So if we just analyze that for a second, different voices. Most assuredly, we're not talking about people being in lockstep with memorized scripts, talking points about your school. But in the end, what they're saying needs to lead you back to the same vision or the same message. Let's just use the Common Core as an example, the Common Core math in particular, because the difference in how we're teaching mathematics with the Common Core has definitely raised some concerns with people who are not sure what all of that is about. So if we talk about the members of your staff speaking the same message with different voices, your different voices could be that of a content area teacher, a math teacher, a science teacher, a social studies teacher, an administrator, the school secretary who also has children in the school, and the list goes on. And when you talk about the message, remember, we're not just talking about the official message. So in our case, when I was a principal, we gathered in the church hall because, the church proper, because it was a big school and that's where we fit. And in August, we'd start our year, and the message would go out, and we would talk about things. So I might get up and talk about in mathematics, and these are the things that we've changed, and we're really excited. And in that context, everyone's very polite and in agreement, and we all go on our way. That's not the meeting I'm talking about. I'm talking about our favorite, the parking lot meeting, the grocery store meeting, the mall meeting. Subtle things can be said that, quite frankly, undermine what the school is doing. In the case of math, and I've had these experiences, we have had schools that have gone full bore into the resources with Common Core math, with programs to teach math very, very deliberate to the Common Core, the changes in instruction. And some of the parents might be, I'm not sure about this. We know parents are a little bit uneasy about the math because they see worksheets and homework that don't look the same. And they get nervous about that. We need to really honor that, because no parent likes the sense that I can't help my child with their homework. But that can sound completely different depending on the message. So if I'm a teacher and I meet someone in the grocery store and they say, I'm kind of concerned about this math, what's with this math? I could say, yeah, we have the new books and we're working with those. Of course, I still use my flashcards because I hear what you're saying. We want to make sure they learn what they learn. That's a very interesting message. It undermines what the school is trying to do versus, quite frankly, I'm starting with a new book, and I will have to admit it's confusing and it's sometimes hard to get into a new program, but I'm just so excited that we're teaching students to really understand math, really truly understand mathematical concepts. so that all the doors are open to them in college and career and whatever they choose to do. Same thing, different message. What are people hearing? So we need to be so very careful that we're all speaking with the same voice. And we can't speak with the same voice if culturally we're not on the same page. This quote, I think, really kind of hits on all of it. And the fact of the matter is, nothing trumps culture, period. And your school has one, whether you do anything to attend to it or not, it's still there. Now, you may have started in your current job, you inherited a culture. You may have inherited a very strong and positive culture. You may have inherited a dysfunctional culture, in your opinion. But the fact is, it's there. And until you really know what it is you're dealing with, this whole concept of shared leadership is just simply not going to go anywhere. It just simply can't go anywhere until we have that commonality. So if you think about this, and I was talking to the new principals, our new principal orientation, and we were talking to them and saying, you know, what if you go into your school, your August in-service days, we always tell them, don't do anything with class lists, decorating classrooms, make sure those first couple of days are truly professional learning, and ask them to describe to you or explain to you the school's mission and vision statements. And I will guarantee you in that context, the teachers will say the right things. Just like if a student does something totally inappropriate, and then you ask them what they should have done, they can clearly articulate it. So they can say what they know needs to be said, but do they live it? Do they live it all year long? And how do you hold them accountable to the mission and the vision and not personalize it? That's where you have to get in order to truly have a collaborative culture. So the first thing you need to do regardless is you need to take a look at your culture. I'm looking at today's meet. It says, what can we do as administrators and educators to alleviate the fears in adapting the Common Core while remaining true to our diocesan guidelines? And I am going to get to that. I will be getting to that, so let me come back to that because it's an excellent question. We know that fear and misinformation is truly driving a lot of what's going on in our schools with regard to the Common Core. I'd like you to take a look at this profile of these characteristics of schools. And I'd like you to just take a look at those and take a minute to think, which of these, if you had to kind of rate them or identify them, which of these do you think were identified by research as most important characteristics found in high-performing schools? And while you're taking a minute to think about that, I'd just like to propose this. A school is not going to achieve academically, have high results with their students by declaring it. And I am in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and it is a fact that our public school system is really in a crisis. We have, I believe, the largest achievement gap in the country. We have some serious issues in our public schools. And a number of years ago, all of the Milwaukee public schools had huge banners flying off their building, high standards start here. But there was nothing that ever, that's not fair. Some schools had a high success rate, but generally speaking, the banners didn't make it happen. The will didn't make it happen because culturally things aren't clicking in some of our public schools to make it happen. And I would propose the same thing is happening in our Catholic schools. So here's what the research said. On the left are characteristics that were identified as those found in high-performing schools, meaning that they focused on those. They were very, very intentional about those. And just by way of clarification, value-added components, which you may be well aware of what that is, but in the context of the research, value-added components were things like parent involvement programming, academic support for children, child care, ties to community resources, those types of things. So those were the value-added. The characteristics on the right are key to a congenial environment. This is pretty critical. It's not semantics, a congenial environment. So we celebrate together, we pray for and support each other in times of need. That's at the heart of our Catholic schools. That's where everybody wants to work, where that is happening. But it's the second one that can be very troubling. Because by recognizing personal circumstances, sometimes can translate into it's the effort that counts. In other words, the results aren't at issue. It's the effort. So I may have a teacher that's been within the Catholic school in my parish for 40 years, and they're well loved, and they have not made the changes that they need to be effective instructors today. Or I might have a teacher who is very popular because they do a lot of extracurricular with the students, but they're not sound instructionally. And if you try to alter that, and some of you have lived this, if you try to say, you know, this teacher really can't be in the classroom, you're going to be bombarded with things like, I thought this was a Catholic school. Catholic schools honor people. They don't treat people like this. And that can really come back in a very bizarre way and cause us to stall and really kind of hamper our efforts. So if we stick to the right, I'm not saying get rid of warmth, humor, repartee. That makes no sense. But if we stick to the right, and that's where we prioritize, we're going to be in trouble, because what you see on the left is what has to happen for us to have a collegial and a professional environment. So let's move on with that idea. Building a collaborative culture is where we're at here today. And that can't happen until we build trust, until we do an assessment of what we're currently dealing with, and most importantly, making sure that we reinforce the good things that are happening. There are good things that are happening. I have that little shot of the book, Becoming a Learning School. And the reason I have that there is because I don't know if you're familiar with Learning Forward as an organization. It used to be the National Council of Staff Development, but they have wonderful, wonderful materials. And as in my role as curriculum director and professional learning that I do with our schools, I have used their materials for years. So when that book came out, and there's a counterpart to it, Becoming a Learning System, which is just as good. It is just an excellent resource. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we really have a true professional learning community as leaders, common language, very, very user-friendly resources for principals, things that we can use with them, and this book met the criteria for all of that. Unfortunately, it's a very expensive book. It's one of those very heavy, glossy books. It's very expensive, but we just decided we were all in on it, and we know we'll be using it for a number of years. So a little commercial, I guess, but I just wanted you to know where the philosophy of what we do really comes from. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of shared leadership. I did a lot of research on this topic, and it was interesting because I found articles that called it shared leadership, distributed leadership, teachers as change agents, teachers as leaders, whatever. When you really come down to it and you look at the descriptors of what these things are, they come down to the same thing. So in our archdiocese, we've just chosen to use the language of shared leadership. Quote from our superintendent. This is our working definition of shared leadership. And if you think about it, the shared vision we've kind of hit on, but the empowerment of others is something we really need to dig into. I was reading Daniel Pink's book, Drive, and I'm sure many of you have read that, but he talks about the fact that what truly motivates people is not money. And God knows we know that within our schools. But what truly motivates people is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if we're talking about shared leadership, we need to make sure that whatever we're engaging our teachers in or other administrators in truly fits that criteria. And if you think about it, that can be, someone might say, well, we already do that in our school. We have autonomy. I would propose that as educators, we certainly have had autonomy. I'm not sure we've had it in a good way. It's been siloed instruction. So you can have autonomy. That doesn't mean it's done in a way that's productive. We could say in our schools, well, we certainly have teachers who are master teachers, but I would propose, what's the common definition of a master teacher? Is this a self-analysis? I believe I'm a master teacher, or is there some criteria by which that can really be validated? And purpose, obviously, in our Catholic schools, we have a higher purpose. There's no question about it. But our higher purpose to be Catholic schools has altered with the diversity of our population, in that we're not dealing with the same dynamic that we have dealt with before. So when we talk about our purpose, this has been a hard shift for some folks, because they want their purpose to be, I want to be the teacher in a parish school with my population of students being Catholic. That's what I signed up for, and in many cases that's not the reality of the school. I was reading something and I was laughing because Dwight Eisenhower said a successful leader must convince and motivate people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. That's just got a real manipulative sound to me. It certainly doesn't sound like a shared vision. It's not really empowering people. It's having them comply by making them think that they're the ones that are creating the situation. So I'm not really buying in too much to Dwight Eisenhower's vision of this, but I do know this: without a shared vision, you're only going to improve if it's because there's a crisis that forces you to do it. We have the the state parental choice program. In particular in Milwaukee, it's a very large program, and the accountability through standardized tests, we're held accountable much as public schools are, with our testing and our publication of test results and so on. And so what starts to happen is our schools suddenly realize we really have to change the way we do business, but it's happening because it's a response, it's a reaction to something, it's a reaction to fear. And that's hardly the motivator we really want to be looking at. If we don't have a shared vision, data is not used. It may be used in pockets, but it's really not used as a true driver of change. And a lot of times we just don't have the structures in place. Our organizational structures, our leadership structures, do they really share the vision? Think about how many things that we have in place in our schools that really, if you look at it very closely, have been designed for the comfort of teachers. And think of your schedule. Is your schedule of classes and your minutes and responsibilities, is that student-friendly or is it teacher-friendly? And I would say guilty as charged in many ways when I was a principal, that we did a lot of things like schedule that were teacher-friendly. But if you took a look at it very intently, did that in fact best serve the students? So if we take a look at this flow chart, and we just look, this is from 5 key principles of model for school improvement. It really speaks to the idea of what our role is today as leaders. We need to improve instructional practice. Everybody needs to be on board. In order to do that, we all have to continue to learn. We have to model that we're learners. We have to make sure that everything we're doing flows from the expertise required for learning and improvement. In other words, best practices in action. And then we have to make sure we exercise authority required, that we have the highest capacity and the accountability. If you think about it, not one step in this can happen if we don't have a culture of collaboration and professionalism. A lot of text on this, and I know that you'll get a copy of this to access, which is why I included it. But if we take a look at traditional leadership versus shared leadership, and I don't really want you to take the time right now to read each step because you'll have access to the PowerPoint. But I just want you to take a look second from the bottom. In this entire chart, it's a side-by-side comparison, and there's a shift between traditional leadership and shared leadership. But one thing is not changing. And the thing that's not changing here is that the leader is responsible for leading and managing change initiatives and how they affect people. There's absolutely no way around it. You as a leader, if that's your role, control the resources. You manage the schedules. You're the one that has the capacity to change things to make learning a priority in your school. And that could be allocation of resources. It could be any number of things. But you need to manage that change. So if we have shared leadership, there are many things that our teacher leaders can do. But this is something that they need you to manage for them. In any of the initiatives that we've done in the Archdiocese, we do a lot with teams, with leadership teams, learning support teams. And the principal is required to be a part of each of those teams. Not because they do the work, that would kind of be counterproductive to shared leadership, but because teachers will tell us over and over, if the principal is not knowledgeable about what's going on, they can't support the work, and if we don't have the support of the principal, we can't do anything as teachers. So we simply cannot get around it. There was an interview with Sister Macaulay from the superintendent of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and it was very interesting. This is a quote. "In Catholic schools, the job has expanded exponentially. Many who were up to the job of the past aren't up to it now. Young people want a life. Those doing it well without a leadership team have no life. This when 80% of the climate is created by the principal." So if you're in a leadership role or you're looking as a teacher leader, we know that we simply cannot continue as a pace of being all things for all people. Can't happen. And as Sister said, if you're doing it, you're probably not a real healthy person or you're totally exhausted, one or the other. So let's take a look at what shared leadership is. We're going to go through this rather quickly and then get to some reflection, if you will. Shared leadership. In shared leadership, teachers engage in frequent, continuous, and increasingly concrete and precise talk about teaching practice. Common language. When teachers have a common language, they can go beyond the surface of what's going on, and they can really look at the complexities of high-quality instruction and learn from each other and experiment with new practices. Teachers and administrators frequently observe each other in teaching and provide useful feedback. This is an interesting one. We've done some surveys with our administrators, and the one thing that they talk about as being the biggest hole, if you will, is that whole idea of observations, and particularly teacher-to-teacher observation outside of the role of evaluation of teachers. So that formative type of observation and that sharing is really problematic, and we all know why, because of time. So structuring this is difficult. But the more people are in and out of each other's classrooms and the more the conversation is about how we can move forward, the more comfortable everyone becomes with that. So if we can move someone being in my classroom from the fear of that or the judgmental nature of that, we can get a lot more done. Teachers and administrators plan, design, research, evaluate, and prepare teaching materials together. Resource. This is all about the resources. You know, what are we using for instruction? How are we determining what best fits? This is an interesting time for us in the whole realm of textbooks. We have teachers that will say, okay, what textbook should we be getting? We just implemented the ELA curriculum, the math curriculum. What textbook should we get? And you know, the answer in a lot of ways is this isn't about the tool. You need to be looking at what it is you're trying to accomplish first, and then you find the materials that will best support that. And that has to be a common effort, because again, I'll go back to the Common Core math because it is different if done well. You cannot have pockets of compliance, if you will, if you want to use that word, of people teaching with integrity and implementing a program with fidelity while others don't, because that is simply going to have roadblocks. Just imagine the student in a school where that's the reality, where you have old school instruction, flashcard instruction going on, and then you move to the next teacher who really works to deep conceptual understanding. And then you may move to another teacher who's very traditional and just wants you to learn the algorithms in math. Just imagine this poor child trying to move along. And quite frankly, 1 year, if we're working with children to really, really think for themselves and have those 21st century skills, you take 1 year and you kind of remove that from their school experience, and then the next teacher tries to restart that, this is not going to work. I mean, the students are really going to be in a bad place. And finally, teachers and administrators teach each other about the practice of teaching. And that is, again, this is the essence of job-embedded professional learning, because it's all about those formative conversations. So if that's what shared leadership is, let's look at what it isn't. This is a really important conversation. Shared leadership is not delegation. If you think about delegation, what do you usually delegate? And I am not against delegation, people, believe me. You need to delegate to survive. I get it. But think about what you delegate. It's usually task-driven. It's not creative. I mean, it's been designed and it has certain outcomes and parameters. It's usually not related to student learning because it tends to be those management type tasks. And there's nothing about them that are creative or have a shared accountability. So I'm just thinking of a few things that get delegated in schools. This was a personal favorite of mine, delegating the Iowa assessment testing. As a principal, I need someone to handle that. There's a lot of detail to that. It's putsy. I need someone to do it, but it certainly is a delegated task. Conference scheduling, your Catholic Schools Week committee, you might have a field day, a prom, an assembly speaker. These are all things that need to be done, and they're all things that a principal can really find someone else to do, but they're definitely not going to support teachers in feeling like they're teacher leaders. And it's not about money. A lot of research says that. They're not leaving our schools because they're not getting paid. Young people are not leaving the teaching profession primarily because of money, although that's certainly a reality for some. The reason they're leaving is because they aren't engaged. And young people today want to be engaged in meaningful work. So I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the 4 I's of teacher leadership. This is just a huge body of research that I wanted to share with you. This is directly from an article by Anthony Colucci. And it just struck me when I was trying to think, all right, if we don't want things to be delegated, then what is it supposed to look like? So here's what he found. Teachers want, for this to be considered authentic leadership opportunities, teachers want something that allows them to use their imagination. So for example, if you get teachers together either at the district level or the school level, and you say, okay, here we have a problem. Parents don't come to conferences, so we need a group of people who are going to coordinate having the teachers make home visits or make sure that every parent is contacted by phone. We need someone to facilitate that. That's a missed opportunity because, quite frankly, in a genuine circumstance where teachers can use their imagination, the teachers would surface the concern. The parents aren't involved in their children's education right now, and it is causing some serious roadblocks for us. The students are completing their homework is just one piece of it, but that lack of parent contact is really problematic. What can we do about that? So the parent engagement is the issue, but if it's a genuine opportunity for teacher leadership, the teachers will say, this is the issue. Let's see, what can we do about this? How can we engage parents? And they will come up with things like, what if we have activities for parents in a time frame that is more responsive to their work schedules? Or what if, or what if, or what if? What if we have parent nights where we provide a meal and the children have childcare because then the parents are relieved from all of that? What if, what if, what if? They want to use their imagination. That's teacher leadership. Teachers want to be able to do tasks that allow them to act independently. Okay, let's say the situation is our enrollment is declining, so we need a committee, and we need a committee that's going to get together. We need someone to manage our Facebook page, and then we're going to make sure that we get postcards mailed out. So we need a group of people that would be willing to manage the mailing and to surface the people we need to contact via a mailing. There's no independence in that. Versus our enrollment is going down, so we really need to make sure we're more of a presence in the community. Our profile and our presence needs to be raised in the community. So how do we do that? How do we get the word out about our school? Let the teachers create ways for that to happen. The third R, inspiration. Will my work inspire others? This one I've had personal experience with because I run the curriculum committees, particularly now with both the Math Common Core curriculum and the English Language Arts Common Core line curriculums. And it was interesting because as we were working on the math curriculum, we had a task. We needed to very specifically write the curriculum for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. If you're in grade 1, you need to teach these skills. And those skills have to get children to a level of proficiency that will allow them to meet the Common Core standards or the state standards or whatever standards you want to be talking about over time. That is really not an inspirational job. Those of you who write curriculum know it's a huge job. It's a critical job. You need practitioners as part of that. There's nothing inspiring about that. What makes that committee, and those committees have formed cohorts, and they're amazing, is we didn't just talk about, here's what the curriculum will be in math, but we talked about, all right, what do our teachers need in order to make this work? And starting 4 years ago, we said, all right, here's the content. We had teacher meetings, and this is teacher to teacher. This is not me getting hundreds of people together in a room. This is teacher to teacher, committee members in both math and English language arts who said, we're going to do train the trainer. We're going to determine what needs to be talked about. We're going to talk about how it's delivered, and we're going to determine what it actually needs to be. And that was an incredible experience. They came up with an amazing process where year 1 for us was, here's what the curriculum will be. Read it, acquaint yourself with it. Then get together with cohorts and talk about what's different. Take the old math curriculum, compare it to the new curriculum. What's different? We had full-day in-services on the mathematical practice standards because we all know that's at the heart of what's different. And they did that work together. So by the time we were on year 3, that's when we were saying, you're teaching this now. This is the curriculum of the Archdiocese, and you need to make sure that your teaching methods and your materials will get you there. They found that very inspiring. and they continue their work today. We've created a summer math academy that goes on, and who knows, it'll go on forever, but it's teacher-driven. Same thing with the English Language Arts group. So the inspiration is not in the writing of curriculum. The inspiration is, wow, I'm inspired to do this work because I'm really going to help make this work for teachers and students. And the final I is integrity. This one I can also relate to personally. We tend to think that teacher leaders are automatically being groomed to be principals. Some teacher leaders eventually will move into administration. But there are a whole lot of teacher leaders that want to be teachers. They have absolutely no desire to move into a leadership role. One of the facilitators that came with me from the Archdiocese to Louisville last summer facilitated the primary group. She has her master's degree in mathematics, and she has absolutely no desire to be anything but a first-grade math teacher, and that will not change. But her expertise and what she's able to do for others is amazing. But she will say, I want to be a teacher. I want to relate to people teacher to teacher. I want the credibility teacher to teacher. I don't want a title. I don't want to be moved or changed in who I am. My personal experience of that was I was a teacher and I was also a curriculum director at the school. And that was more of an administrative piece. That was a very odd place to be because I was on this fence. And so I was sort of a teacher and I was sort of administration, and my responsibilities kind of blurred that relationship, and it didn't help me really focus as much as I would like on either one. It was just a very strange thing. Now eventually, obviously, I'm in my job today, so I went into an administrative role. But had I not had that inclination, I didn't want that title. That title didn't really support me in becoming a better teacher. Genuinely, how do we make this happen for teachers? We make the professional learning in their schools job embedded. We make them the facilitators for small groups of teachers in other schools at that grade level. We make their work job embedded, practical to teaching. And you all know this, and some of you may be teachers, although this is a time of the day where that might not be the case, but you all know that. You want to be a teacher. You want credibility with your peers. You don't want people having a plan for you that's not your own. So I spent a lot of time on that, but I really wanted you to think about that when you're thinking about what exactly do I ask people in my building to do. I wanted to show this to you. We have in the Archdiocese something called exemplary recognition, and there are some categories that teachers can apply to receive, and it's a very formal award that we do at our convention, exemplary recognition. And one of our schools has just been an amazing, in fact, they received exemplary in 3 out of 5 categories. They're that good. They have an incredible culture of shared vision and shared leadership. And we had asked them, as part of receiving an exemplary award, you get to help us out whenever we call on you to help model for others what's going on. And this is something that they designed, and I thought it was kind of interesting. They brought this to a presentation that they did about team building in their school. And they just proposed this, and they said, all right, take a look at each of these, and if you had to check one, who is primarily responsible for each of the following? And I'm going to ask you to do this task. So if you have anything around, a piece of scrap paper, a napkin, if you're eating lunch, whatever you have, I'd like you to just take a few minutes and just go down, number from 1 to 15. It's kind of putsy as a poll question, but I think it'll be interesting. Number from 1 to 15. And just determine, and this is real quick, I know this is not reflective, but just first reaction, just figure out, would it be P, T, or both? While you're finishing that, I'm going to share with you the poll question so that we're ready to roll when everyone's had a chance to go through this. What I'd like you to look at is which category did you check most often? Did you check principal more often than not, teachers more often than not, or both more often than not? So while you're thinking about that and you're identifying that, I'd like you to consider what the results of this mean for you. What does it say about your current practice? And what are areas that you're thinking, I seem to be, as the principal, I seem to be taking on a very heavy load here of these activities. These are some things that could be shared. Or I've delegated this to teachers, and then only you can determine if that's been a positive experience for teachers and for you. How much of this am I really sharing? So I think it's just a really good self-reflection for you on a tool that was designed by a school to try to get a handle at where they were in shared leadership. Because as you take a look at this and you start to think about how am I going to move my school into true shared leadership, you're going to have to think about a few things. And one of the most important considerations is how much has to change. Because reculturing, that's Fullen's words, Michael Fullen, reculturing means that unless you really have a true and permanent change, nothing is going to change. Nothing will really change. A lot of cosmetic things can happen within your school, but if you're really looking for that systemic change, you have got to really dig into this culture issue. So it's really key for all of you to determine what is the degree of change that you need. And this can vary greatly, but it's also going to impact the steps that you take. Also think about what your policies and procedures and your expectations in your school really look like. Back to Daniel Pink, but he talks about the fact that we tend to have our rules and regulations and policies and procedures in place to deal with 10 to 15% of those who really aren't on board or aren't intrinsically motivated to do the right thing. So think about how much energy you put into accommodating or holding accountable a very small group, when in fact, let's see if we've got some results here. I'll wait for Kate to get us back. Okay, let me just get over here. Okay, I'm going to let Kate let us know what the results of that are. See what we've got here. Sorry, I'm fixing here. Okay, I'm sorry. That's my 24% say that they're primarily seeing the principal as the person who's taking charge. 5% where the teachers are taking charge. 71% both. I would say that's a really positive response to this if you think about it, because it means that there's some really good sharing going on of responsibility within your schools, and their authentic shared leadership responsibilities. So let's just go back down here. We already talked about this. The last thing I'd really like to spend some time on for you, and I know I'm needing to move on a bit here, but let's just talk about what I call the weeds in our garden. And what that means is there are some things that could be going on in your school that are just barriers. You're thinking, you know, we have a good environment, we get along, but for some reason we're just not getting there. We can't get this true shared leadership going on. So let's just talk about 4 weeds or 4 things that tend to be the barriers to shared leadership. And the first one is biggie. People are saying we are not responsible for student learning. And this, again, is cultural, and it sounds something like this. It sounds like, you know, I'd like all students to be able to learn, but some of my students they just aren't capable of learning. You know, they have low IQs. They're really not capable of learning. Or, you know, our students come from very poor families, and so we can't have an expectation of them to really advance. Or we can't control their home life, and as long as their home life is really problematic, they can't learn. And we can't expect to get better results until we have more money, or we have more staff, or we have more technology. And the list goes on and on. So if you have teachers with a mindset of it's our job to teach and it's the student's job to learn, and we're not going to get better till they change, this is going to be problematic. Because let's face it, in any Catholic school, we have these types of statements in our mission statement. I doubt that any of you have a mission statement that doesn't have something that alludes to this. So here's what we say. Is this what we really mean? I love this quote. I've used it over and over. This is at the heart of it, because until whatever your mission statement says, or until whatever your vision statement says matches that reality in this day and age, we're going to have a problem. We were having a reflection session with our principals, and one of the principals said, you know, I took a look at that quote, and here's what I decided. Our job is to work with the teachers we have, not the ones we would like to have, not the ones we used to have, the ones we have right now, all of them. And of course, since this was a group of administrators, they started to laugh, because we all know when you become a principal, you still have a class. Your class just happens to be adults. But there is an inevitable gap between true culture change and the journey that all teachers have to take to get there. Because I would guess there's not a school where you have everyone on your staff that's truly on this page. So you may have a situation where you start to make these cultural shifts, and when you start to make the true hard changes, like changing the way you schedule things or changing the way you do certain things so that it's more for student value than teacher comfort, some people are going to leave. They don't want that. You have teachers that say, you know what, this whole technology thing, I'm gone. I just don't want to make this shift. So some leave just for those reasons, and some leave because the pressure of the culture of the school becomes, the strength of the culture of the school is so great that if you're not on board, you just really can't be there, and you know you can't be there, and that's really what we want to do. So what can we do about it? It's fine to say it's a weed, but what can we do about it? We can create cognitive dissonance. In other words, help staff members question their assumptions by presenting them with evidence. The students I teach can't do well on standardized tests. Well, you know, there's a school down the street with the same population we have, and they're successful. So yes, I guess the reality is students like yours can make progress, so let's just go from there. We talked earlier about celebrating what's good, celebrating small successes, and this is one of the things that I find in working with schools with school improvement planning is waiting too long to get to the good stuff. So create, you know, small victories, anything that's going right, short-term attainable goals, and celebrate them. And make sure that your teachers are validated in ways that aren't just about the numbers. They're validated in ways that really show that their desire to learn and their desire to move forward. We have something called a rose ceremony in our archdiocese, where at our first meeting we just give a rose to a principal for something that we've observed that we just really, really admire. And it's not about test scores. It's not about most increased enrollment. It's just about service to others. So we've given a rose to a teacher who was at a school, and she was told she was non-renewed. And she dealt with that situation with such a level of professionalism, ended up at another school, and we celebrated the fact that she got through a very adverse time and held her head up and handled it with such professionalism. When we give out those roses, there isn't a dry eye in the house. It's really kind of interesting. And I've come to the conclusion those roses sometimes mean more than a lot of the other rewards that they get. Another weed, we preferred to work by ourselves. Well, we certainly know we have fostered that in education. Unfortunately, a collaborative environment doesn't really allow much time for that. So we need to be thinking about that. How do we structure our schools so that working in isolation really isn't an option? It's really not possible. So this, again, I know is a great challenge, but a collaborative culture is not going to happen because we hope that it does or because we invite people to be collaborative. It's going to happen because of ongoing daily job-embedded professional growth that involves collaboration. Weed 3, protecting our own territory. This one, I don't know as much in Catholic schools if I would see this much, and I'm just making that assumption, but this is really about resource allocation. I need to make sure that our department in a high school or our grade level in an elementary school or our program is protected. So I'm going to be protecting my own turf. So my actions are not going to be collaborative because I need to take care of myself. This might be something as much as I'm a really good teacher and the parents love me and I'm very effective and the next teacher isn't. I enjoy being valued and loved by the parents, and I enjoy being really, really well respected. So I don't want to open myself up so that everybody's good. I know it sounds weird, but you know what I'm saying. You know, if everybody's just top-notch, I really kind of like that position. So that's an interesting weed to deal with too. And finally, this is focusing on activities rather than results, and I see this over and over again. We will do stuff, but we don't really sit down and measure, and I mean truly measure the results of that, the student learning, and I mean on an ongoing, frequent basis. So the activity, we're going to get a program, we're going to get more professional learning in this area, we're going to talk about student work at faculty meetings, and the list goes on, but it either doesn't happen or the results aren't really part of the conversation, and that is truly problematic. And as a principal, that's really where you need to step in and say, you know, let's keep our activities to a number that's manageable for us to really focus in on results. So I would invite you, as you're contemplating all of this later, to just think about which weed is the greatest challenge for your school and what can you start to do about that? How can you work through that? I wanted to include this in the PowerPoint, and it's a lot of text and we're certainly not going to be reading this together, but I thought it was a nice guide, and you'll have access to the PowerPoint, and I would just offer this as a resource that might be good for you to just start at the district level. You can see it's at the district level, but I think you can take this down to the school level just as a starting point for the conversation. And always remember, it's warmth, humor, a warm working environment, support is important because we all want to be happy, but we all need to be happy going in the same direction, and that's the improvement of student learning. So we want to make sure we keep the pluses that we already have, but we need to make sure that we're attending to what we see on the left. And in closing, this is where it's at. So I would like to take time. I have a few questions here in today's meeting, and I would just like to make sure that I touch on these very briefly before we wrap it up today. The first question that popped up earlier, what can we do as administrators and educators to alleviate the fears in adapting the Common Core while remaining true to our diocesan guidelines? I think I can share with you how we seem to get over that hurdle, and in Wisconsin, and then the Archdiocese in particular, last year was quite a year. But here's what we did. We took the Common Core standards, and we most definitely made sure that our curriculum, the curriculum we wrote, made sure that our students would be able to meet all of the Common Core standards. And so we have our curriculum written for teachers. And in the teacher component of our curriculum, because the teachers wrote the curriculum and they wanted that correlation to the Common Core standards numbers, because they knew that all of the resources they'd be working with, all of their textbooks, everything it would be referring to those numbers. So they wanted those to appear for the teacher use. But what we did was we took that curriculum, and this wasn't anything different than we do with our other areas, but we took our math and our English language arts curriculums then, and they are aligned to the Common Core. There's no question about it. We get into semantics here in the Archdiocese. Did you adapt them? Did you adopt them? Did you align? Finally, we just had to say, all right, here's our curriculum. So we literally took our curriculum. And these are all on our website. I'll put that on today's meet, archmill.org. Curriculum. You can see all the curriculum that we have for all content areas. And it literally says in grade 1, these are all the things that their children will be taught in grade 1 math. And here's what will happen in grade 1 English language arts. So it's all there, all those specific skills. So what we were able to do is say to people, if you're concerned about the Common Core, that's really not the question. The question is there anything in our curriculum, is there anything we're teaching that you find problematic? Because if you find something in the curriculum that you think is off-base, then we can have a conversation about that. And what it did, it enabled us to move the conversation off of the Common Core standards, because quite frankly, people would look at what we're teaching and they really couldn't come up with anything, that they could say was problematic. Now, in the scheme of this whole Common Core descent where that moved, then it moved into textbooks, and now it's moving into testing. So that's kind of where we're at. But the Common Core standards, that conversation specific to the standards and their impact on the curriculum, we were able to handle just by saying, here's what we're teaching, what is it that you find problematic? Another thing that we would, and then to answer the second part of your question, true to our diocesan guidelines, that is the Archdiocese of Milwaukee curriculum. So there's no even alluding to the Common Core anymore. It's no different than when we wrote our math curriculum back in the day and we used the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics and the Wisconsin Model Standards. So we wrote our curriculum and based them off of those documents, but at no point in our individual curriculum did we say, here is the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics curriculum, it becomes ours. Another thing that we've really, I think that we've been able to address is this whole idea of the materials that are going to be used. I mean, it is a fact that in textbook companies there's a serious, if you take a look at the products and the book that has Common Core aligned on the cover and the counterpart that's the same book but it doesn't say Common Core, which is where publishing companies have had to go. Just if you haven't run into this, you can literally say, I want to adopt this text but I don't want the Common Core cover. That's how, pardon me, ridiculous this situation has gotten. But that's an option. And strangely enough, if that's not on the cover, parents feel like, okay, well, we're staying true to our Catholic identity. So this I find so bizarre when I think about it, that it's these little nuances that have people concerned. But bottom line is, we're Catholic schools. We've always been Catholic schools. From the time that there was a textbook published, we've had to be vigilant to make sure that it aligns with our values, to repeatedly make sure people know that we're not going to be using any resources, this myth about the appendix and the English language arts. We will monitor what our students are using and you will be knowledgeable about what we use. So I think people are starting to see that the world really hasn't changed. English language arts we haven't found to be a problematic adoption, to be honest, once we got over the thing about the required reading. Because reading is such a strength in our Catholic schools, and English language arts has been a strength that we were closer to the expectations of the Common Core with English language arts than math. And if you're an instructor and you make subtle changes in the types of writing you're teaching and you have more of a focus on disciplinary literacy, all of those things can happen. They don't seem to trigger concern with parents. The math is a different story, but I can tell you honestly, we have a number of schools now that have been using really a Common Core line. Go Math is just one product that happens to be used here, and they're in their second and third year, and I can now document with statistics, with test results, the positive impact this is having on students learning math. So that, you know, if you can just ride out the storm, eventually you can say yes, but. So hopefully I answered that question. And then I have another question here. Have you ever had two small groups of teachers having constant disagreements with each other? If so, how did you help them work this conflict out? That never happens. I have no idea. I'm very facetious, of course, that happens all the time. I don't know if the disagreements, I'm assuming the disagreements are on instruction practices. I'm not sure what they're disagreeing about. But in any situation like this, you always need to just depersonalize it. You know, what's the vision, what are the goals, what are the student outcomes we're looking at, and what behaviors, what teacher behaviors in instruction and assessment are getting the students where they need to be. So it's really all about the students and the outcome and what's getting them there. And if what you're doing isn't getting them there, it's not about you being a bad person, it's about what you're doing is not getting them there. So if the teachers are having constant disagreements with each other, I think the first thing you need to do is say, well, first of all, culturally, what are those disagreements? What is the impact those disagreements are having on your culture, your teaching staff generally, because that's problematic if they're constantly disagreeing. But if it's really something about practice, disagreement in practice, I think you really just need to shift the conversation to the results, to the student outcomes, and go from there. And sorry, but without more information, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but definitely something that's a challenge. So I am way at the end, 1 minute, which would get us to the end of our conversation. So I want to thank you very much for joining me today, and I wish you all the best. I hope that this has provided a little bit of groundwork for you in just having some reflection about the whole idea of culture in your school and how you can move forward to shared leadership. Today's Meet conversation will be open for a week, so if you have anything else you'd like to share, or if the people who submitted the questions want to continue the conversation, I certainly would be happy to do that. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining me today, and have a nice day. What's left of it. Thank you.